like most technologies, there's an initial fascination with them, and then as we discover their risks or the misuse associated with them, there's a sense of vulnerability and reliability that we place on these new technologies, whether it's radio or electricity or the internet. There's a swing of the pendulum towards regulation. We certainly saw that with radio in the 1920s, for example, and the desires for greater control and regulation and content. The internet is no different. We're seeing a shift from forces propelling globalization to ones favoring fragmentation, or the splinternet as it's called. And this manifests itself in several ways. And I just think three at least warrant attention right here very quickly. First, in contrast to the general feeling of the wonderful aspects of the internet that were manifest in the 2010 Arab Spring, we've seen for the last few years authoritarian governments insist on greater content control and surveillance ability. That ranges from national firewalls that we see in China, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, et cetera. And this is beyond just banning websites. And by the way, in a country like China, we're talking about a very serious level of banning some of the world's most popular websites, whether it's Google itself, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, they're all banned in China. Excuse me. And so it's banning websites, monitoring activity, which is certainly done in China. And then another thing we are seeing increasingly in authoritarian governments is localized data control, insisting the data that relates to countries, that relates to citizens in this particular country, has to be maintained, analyzed, processed, stored in that particular country. We're also seeing limits on encryption. There's been a lot written about Apple's tussles with the Chinese government over the keys to encryption and what level of ability the Chinese government will have to see encrypted messages and VPN tunnels and so on and so forth. Sometimes this is all done under the guise of privacy. A perfect example of that is China's proposed new personal information protection law, which is modeled after European statutes. It has some good things in it, like requiring consent on how your data is being used, but it doesn't really apply to the government and has huge holes in it that would allow the government to undertake a continued surveillance. The second point, especially in Europe, where there are different notions of privacy, after the Snowden disclosures and the Schrems decision, which my fellow panelist Bob Litt was very much involved in the American response to, we're seeing a general push throughout the European Union on more aggressive regulation of social media, the digital world, well beyond the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and how this will affect the worldwide internet and the global applications and the large platforms is yet to be seen, but we're seeing a very concerted European effort in this regard. And then finally, thirdly, just a general backlash against big tech. We see this in the European Union, in the United States, even in China, which has its own antitrust approach, proposed antitrust approach. We're seeing this in the United States with Congress full of ideas on curtailing for antitrust reasons, big tech, the efforts to look at the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which gives an immunity shield to social media platforms. All this is under great scrutiny. I think one of the defining issues for the next several years will be this balancing of globalization forces that look for efficiency and functionality and innovation and fewer restrictions on technology, and versus national efforts to regulate for both benign and nefarious reasons. Right now, in my opinion, the latter is in the ascendancy, but I wouldn't rule out the ability of big tech to outmaneuver, so to speak, and out-innovate some of these regulations. So I think this is going to be a very fluid, very dynamic debate over the next several years for all societies.